Call came at 2047 in the morning. Not a distress call. Not a patient crashing. A knock on the window of Lena Hartwell's car while she sat in the parking lot of Mercy General, still in her scrubs, too exhausted to drive the 12 minutes home. She hadn't been drinking. She hadn't been speeding. She had been sitting still, engine off, forehead resting against the steering wheel, letting the silence do what 4 ibuprofen couldn't. The knock came again, harder. She rolled down the window. The officer standing outside was young, maybe 26, 27, with the kind of jaw that looked like it had never questioned itself. His name tag read Garner. His flashlight swept the interior of her car without asking permission. "You doing okay in there?" "Yes, sir. Just resting before I drive home." "You been drinking tonight?" Lena blinked. She was still wearing her hospital ID. Her stethoscope was around her neck. There was a coffee cup in the cup holder that said Mercy General Nursing Staff on the side in faded block letters. "No, I just finished a 14-hour shift." Garner leaned in slightly. "Step out of the vehicle, please." She didn't argue. She had learned a long time ago that arguing in a parking lot at 3 a.m. never went the way you hoped. She opened the door carefully. Her left knee had been giving her trouble since the deployment, and the cold always made it worse, and she stepped out onto the asphalt. "Left knee," she said. "Service injury. I move a little slow." Garner didn't acknowledge this. Walk toward the front of the vehicle. She walked. Each step sent a dulled, grinding sensation up through her leg, the kind that had a name and a file number at the VA and 3 separate doctors who had documented it in writing. She made it to the hood of the car and turned around, satisfied. "I'm going to need your license and registration." "I wasn't driving." "License and registration, ma'am." She went back to the car, got the documents, handed them over, watched Garner study them the way people study things they've already made up their minds about. Lena Hartwell, age 31, registered nurse, United States Army veteran. 2 tours. 1 knee that would never fully work right again. 1 parking lot in Davenport, Iowa at 2051 in the morning. "Have you taken any substances tonight? Any prescription medication?" "I take medication for my knee. It was prescribed. I took it this morning, not tonight." "What medication?" She told him. He wrote it down like it was evidence. What happened next took 11 minutes, and she would replay those 11 minutes for months afterward. In the car, in the shower, in the break room at work when things got quiet. Garner told her he was going to conduct a field sobriety test. She explained, again, about her knee. He told her it would be brief. She told him, again, that she had a documented service-related injury that affected her balance and her gait. He told her that if she refused, he would have grounds to detain her. So she tried. She stood on 1 leg for 4 seconds before the knee gave. Not dramatically, no falling, no gasping, just a small sideways shift, a hand bracing on the hood of the car, a sharp exhale. Garner wrote something down. "I need you to come with me." "Am I being arrested?" "You're being detained for further evaluation." The word evaluation sat between them like something cold. She asked for her phone. He said it would stay with the vehicle. She asked if she could call someone. He said she could make a call from the station. She looked at the hospital behind her, the building where she had spent the last 14 hours, and she thought about the 12 patients she had triaged that shift, the 2 she had held the hands of while the doctors delivered news no one wanted to deliver, the one who had squeezed her fingers and said thank you in a voice that was barely a voice at all. Then she got in the back of Garner's cruiser. The station was 8 minutes away. She counted the turns. They put her in a room that smelled like floor cleaner and burnt coffee. A different officer, older, rounder, less interested, took her information and told her to sit tight. She sat. She looked at the clock on the wall. 13:09 a.m. She had a 7 a.m. shift. The thing about being a nurse for long enough is that you get very good at reading rooms. You learn to tell the difference between a room that is moving towards something and a room that is waiting for someone to come make a decision. This room was the second kind. Nobody was processing anything. Nobody was testing anything. They were just keeping her there. At 3:34 a.m., The door opened. The woman who walked in was not young. Late 40s, maybe 50, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of posture that comes from years of not needing to explain herself. She was wearing plain clothes, dark slacks, a jacket, and she carried a slim folder that she set on the table without ceremony. Ms. Hartwell. Yes. My name is Sergeant Diane Okafor. I'm with the department's Professional Standards Unit. She sat down across from Lena. I want to hear what happened tonight. In your own words, take your time. Something about the way she said take your time, not as a courtesy but as an instruction, made Lena pay attention. She told Okafor everything. The parking lot, the window knock, the walk to the hood of the car, the field sobriety test she had warned them she couldn't complete, the knee, the years of documentation, the deployment. Okafor listened without interrupting. She wrote 2 things down. Just 2. When Lena finished, Okafor looked at her for a moment. Officer Garner's body camera was activated for the entire stop, she said. So was his dash cam. Lena hadn't known that. Nobody had told her. I'm showing you something, Okafor said, and she turned a tablet around on the table. The footage was grainy in the way all parking lot footage is grainy, but it was clear enough. Clear enough to see Lena explain her knee once, twice, 3 times. Clear enough to see the small sideways shift when she tried to stand on one leg and the grinding side that joint registered on her face. Clear enough to see Garner write something in his notepad immediately after. Not before she stumbled, not while she was explaining. After. He wrote, failed balance test at 2:58 a.m., Okafor said, 14 seconds after you braced yourself on the hood. He did not note your disclosure of a service-related injury. He did not note that you requested accommodation. He noted a failed test. The room was very quiet. What I'm about to tell you, Okafor continued, is that this is not the first time. There had been a woman named Teresa 6 months ago. A retired schoolteacher, 63 years old, pulled over on Kimberly Road at dusk for a broken taillight. Teresa had bad hips. She had told the officer about her hips. The officer had noted a failed sobriety test. The case had been dropped when her attorneys subpoenaed the bodycam footage and found a similar pattern. Disclosure, disregard, documentation that didn't match the tape. There had been a man before Teresa whose name Okafor didn't share. And there had been a complaint filed internally 8 months ago by another officer in the department, a complaint that had been reviewed, categorized as a performance concern, and filed away. The officer who filed that complaint was the same one who had flagged tonight's stop when he saw it come through the system. The same one who had called Okafor at home at midnight before Garner had even brought Lena in. His name was Officer Danny Reeves, and he'd been with the department for 11 years, and he had almost quit twice because of things like this. Lena sat with all of this for a moment. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you have a right to know, Okafor said. And because what you do next matters. What Lena did next was call her sister, who called a lawyer, who arrived at the station at 6:15 a.m. in a coat that had clearly been grabbed off a chair in a hurry. His name was Paul Adeyemi, and he had the practiced calm of someone who had learned to save his anger for courtrooms. He reviewed what Okafor had shared. He reviewed the footage. He asked 3 questions, listened to the answers, and then he said, "We're going to file." They filed a formal complaint with the department's Professional Standards Unit and a separate civil rights complaint with the State Attorney General's office. Adeyemi cross-referenced the Teresa case and the unnamed case before it and wrote a 14-page brief that used the word pattern 31 times. Garner was placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. The department issued a statement that said nothing. Lena went to her 7 a.m. shift. She was 22 minutes late. Her charge nurse looked at her, looked at the circles under her eyes, and didn't ask any questions, just pointed her toward Bay 4, where a 67-year-old man was waiting to hear results he already suspected. She held his hand when the doctor came in. She stayed with him afterward. When the doctor left and the room got heavy, that was a Thursday. By the following Monday, 3 local news stations had the story. By Wednesday, a reporter from the Des Moines Register had called Adeyemi. By Friday, a veterans advocacy organization out of Chicago, had issued a public statement and offered to support the case. Lena did not speak publicly. Not yet. She went to work. She came home. She iced her knee and took her medication at the right time, and answered her sister's calls and did not read the comment sections on the news articles, because she had learned a long time ago that comment sections are not written for the people the stories are about. What she did read was the internal affairs report when Adeyemi sent it to her. Garner had been written up once before, not for a stop, but for a use of force incident that had also been recorded, also reviewed, and also classified as within policy. The officer who had questioned that classification was Danny Reeves. His concerns had been noted and dismissed. There was a phrase in the internal affairs report that stayed with Lena for a long time. Under the section describing the Teresa case, someone had written, "Outcome consistent with officer discretion." She read that line several times. Outcome consistent with officer discretion, as if discretion were a force of nature, as if it didn't have a name and a badge number and a pattern that a sergeant and professional standards have been tracking for 8 months. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in November. The courtroom was not dramatic, the way courtrooms are in movies. It was fluorescent lit and smelled faintly of carpet cleaner, and the gallery was half filled with people who had driven in from places that don't usually make the news. Adeyemi laid out the pattern methodically. Teresa. The unnamed man before her. Lena. 3 stops. 3 physical limitations disclosed. 3 limitations not recorded. 3 failed tests documented. 1 officer. 8 months of internal complaints from a colleague who had been, in Adeyemi's phrasing, systematically ignored. The body cam footage was entered into evidence. Danny Reeves testified. He had short brown hair going gray at the temples, and he spoke the way people speak when they've rehearsed the truth so many times they don't need notes anymore. He described what he had seen. He described a complaint he had filed. He described the meeting where it had been categorized as a performance concern and the supervisor who had told him, in those words, to let it go. The supervisor in question was also present. He did not take the stand. Garner testified. He said he had followed protocol. He said the documentation reflected his honest assessment. He said he had not heard Lena mention her knee. Adeyemi played the footage. The timestamp read 2054 a.m. Lena's voice, tired, clear, patient, said, "I have a service-related injury to my left knee. It affects my balance and my gait." Garner looked directly at her when she said it. Then he wrote in his notepad. The courtroom was quiet in the particular way courtrooms get when something has been made undeniable. The judge ruled 4 days later. Garner was terminated. The supervisor was suspended without pay pending a separate review. The city was required to pay damages. The department was required to implement new documentation protocols for field sobriety evaluations, protocols that mandated officers record any disclosed medical conditions before administering any physical test. The new protocols went into effect in February. Lena heard about the ruling on her lunch break in the break room at Mercy General from Adeyemi in a phone call that lasted 4 minutes. She thanked him. She hung up. She sat with her coffee for a moment. The nurse next to her, a 24-year-old named Jordan who had just finished his first solo triage shift, looked over. "Good news?" "Yeah," Lena said. "I think so." She didn't explain further. Jordan didn't push. He went back to his charting. She thought about Danny Reeves, who had filed a complaint that went nowhere, and then filed it again in a different form when he saw her case come through, and who had testified in a room full of people who were watching him say things that would make his department uncomfortable. She thought about Sergeant Okafor, who had driven to the station in the middle of the night and sat across a table and said, "Take your time," like she meant it. She thought about Teresa, whose name she only knew from a brief and who she had never met, and who had been through something similar on a different road at a different time of day, and had probably sat in a room somewhere and felt exactly as alone as Lena had felt at 39 a.m. in a plastic chair that smelled like floor cleaner. She thought about all the stops that don't have footage. She finished her coffee, she rinsed the cup, she went back to work. Her 1 p.m. was a 38-year-old woman who had come in alone and sat in the waiting room for 2 hours before anyone had thought to ask if she was okay. Lena sat with her for 20 minutes before the intake paperwork. She asked her name. She asked what had brought her in. She listened to the answer the way Okafor had listened to her, without interrupting, without writing anything down, without looking at the clock. The woman finished talking. She looked down at her hands. "Does it get better?" she asked. Lena considered the question the way you consider a question that deserves a real answer. "Not on its own," she said. "But yeah, it gets better." I keep thinking about that timestamp. 2054 a.m. Lena's voice on the recording. Tired, measured, patient, saying exactly what she needed to say, and Garner looking right at her when she said it, then writing something down anyway. That's the part that stays with me. Not the detention, not the plastic chair at 3 a.m., or the fluorescent lights or the room that smelled like floor cleaner. The part that stays with me is that the lie was so small. A notepad, a timestamp, 14 seconds of deliberate omission. And that small lie, made by one person in one parking lot on one night, was built on the assumption that nobody would ever check. The thing about doing wrong quietly is that it requires everyone around you to stay quiet too. Garner needed the internal complaint to stay filed and forgotten. He needed Danny Reeves to take the hint and stop pushing. He needed the pattern to remain a pattern instead of becoming a record. And for a long time, it worked. Because most people, when they're told to let something go, let it go. It's easier. It costs less. Danny Reeves let it cost him something. That's what I come back to when I think about what it actually means to act with integrity. Not the dramatic version, not the courtroom speech, but the quieter version. Filing a complaint that gets dismissed and then finding another way to file it. Doing the right thing without any guarantee it will land. That's not heroism as a concept. That's a decision made in a regular office, probably on a regular afternoon, by someone who was tired and frustrated and did it anyway. And Lena. She didn't have the luxury of waiting for the right moment. She was 31 years old, with a documented knee injury and a 7 a.m. shift, and she had to decide in real time how to move through a situation designed to make her feel like she had no options. What strikes me isn't that she stayed calm, though she did. It's that she stayed clear. She said the same thing 3 times because it was true and it mattered, even when no one was writing it down. That kind of clarity doesn't come from not being scared. It comes from knowing what you know and refusing to unknow it under pressure. Sergeant Okafor drove to the station in the middle of the night and sat across a table and said, "Take your time," like she meant it. That's what competence in service of fairness actually looks like. Not a speech, not a gesture. A folder, a tablet, 2 things written down. What happened to Lena happened because a system failed her. What changed for the next person happened because 3 people. One filing paperwork that got dismissed, one driving across town at midnight, one walking into a law office at 6 a.m. In a coat grabbed off a chair, refused to let the failure be the final word. I think about all the stops that don't have footage. I think about Teresa, 63 years old, bad hips, Kimberly Road at dusk. I think about the unnamed man before her. I think about how many times something becomes a pattern before anyone decides the pattern is the story. The camera didn't save Lena. The people who chose to look at the footage did. That's the part we get to control.